All right, Tim. We have a new accumulation block. What's the theme of this month, and can you tell us a bit more about it?
I sure can. 612 is the overall theme. When we're thinking accumulation, we think one, building muscle, or potentially two, working on work capacity. And one of the biggest premises behind that is, do we want to further delineate that between functional hypertrophy or hypertrophy? So functional hypertrophy would be kind of what we did last block, working a little lower rep scheme, but kind of in that intermediate zone, where you're developing the size of the muscle fiber in conjunction with building strength. Now, on the other end, hypertrophy, we're just trying to improve the size of the cell. So really not really mattering which way we want to do it, do we want to improve the size of the muscle fiber or the actual cell itself. The goal is just a bigger, stronger, or bigger muscle in a sense. We're shifting more towards the hypertrophy side. And one of the biggest premises from that 612 is looking at using a heavier loaded movement from that 6, right, to get greater motor unit activation. And when we get more motor units activated, we get more muscle fibers. And when we're trying to get a whole area really bigger, is the more muscle fibers we're going to get, the more hypertrophy ultimately we're going to get, and the bigger bang for our buck from that A series. So the premise is 612 and trying to leverage that. Now, an extra twist to that is we're doing a reverse pyramid. So we're starting off heavier, and we're going to work our way down. Traditionally, you go work your way up, right, or straight sets. We're going to go the opposite, and there's a couple reasons behind that. One is quality. When you're getting to your 5th or 6th set, it's really hard to maintain great position just from fatigue. So we don't want to get that as a limiting factor, right? Keep people safe, maximize the movement. But then a bigger part of it is, if we're looking at like from a tonnage perspective, is how am I going to equate more total load in the bar over the course of 4 weeks? Potentially, if I can get a heavier weight earlier, as opposed to just fending off fatigue, we should theoretically be able to get higher weight over the course of the 4 weeks, which should create more of what we want, which is ultimately hypertrophy.
Are you going to get to that same point when it's week 4, where it's just like you got to get your mind right when you're in the rack? And is, like, for example, in the last block, it was the last set where you're probably at your heaviest weight, unless you were going the same weight each time. But no matter what, that last set was just killer. Is it the same case in this block as well?
Yeah. So when we look at things like Rpe and workload, which is just your Rpe multiplied by minutes of activity, we can see a lot in terms of how you interpreted the difficulty of that program and the overall stress on your body and your body as a system. And typically what we see in accumulation block is really, really high workloads week 1, as opposed to intensification block. It's the opposite. We see actually a really low workload. And when we have a really high workload week 1, we're in survival mode for the next 2 to 3 weeks, where we're trying to hopefully avoid that. And honestly, when you're in constant survival mode, you're not going to get the full benefit of the program. You're not going to really get the fight to put more weight on the bar. You're just thinking, how can I make it through this, as opposed to how can I do this with the best possible quality and the most effectiveness. And if we're going to try to reverse the trend a little bit, go heavier and work lighter, we hope to maintain a lot higher quality and get overall higher weights recorded throughout the 4 weeks, as opposed to getting week 3 and week 4 and reconciling the fact that I'm just completely gassed.
You mentioned this a little bit, but want to kind of circle back to it. So last block was that traditional 5x5, traditional in the sense of, like, I feel like a lot of folks are familiar with that set and rep scheme. How does the work that we did in the last block lead us into what we're going to be doing in this block?
The effect of improving the neuromuscular quality, of improving motor unit activation, greater rate coding, which is firing, synchronization of the motor units, so using the right kind of motor units in harmony, that translates to ultimately coming to an accumulation block. We essentially have a bigger engine to work with when we're doing something that's designed to build muscle. And we're going to be able to utilize higher weights, which from that perspective is we're going to get more out of our training sessions. We're stronger, more efficient, and when we're doing something like 612, which is going to be a lot of reps, the more weight and the better technique I can have for that, the more overall effect I'm going to get from it, which is completely contingent upon what we did in the previous block of building strength up to the highest possible levels.
Transitioning a bit here straight to the card. So looking at it right now, I don't see barbell back squat on it. Is there a reason for that?
We try to get back-to-back blocks of our A series. So strength block or intensification block, last block, we utilize front squat as one of our days. And we like to parlay that into an accumulation block. One, familiarity. It's an easier transition to maybe a new style or rep scheme. When you change the exercises, you're going to incur some muscle soreness, and that could be a limiting factor, which isn't a bad thing. That's kind of like showing you have some neglected areas. But for us to get the most out of this block, we like to have that limited exercise variation from a strength or intensification block to an accumulation block to kind of get maximal benefit as quickly as possible. We'll transition to back squat next block, where we're going to hit a big intensification block again. But the premise is let's get some familiarity with it so we can get quicker results.
Is that also the same reason, say, why it's not a single leg squat? Is it that same sort of purpose?
Mm-hmm. And on the lens of when we utilize some sort of unilateral movement with a barbell or dumbbell, it's kind of running its course of looking at, we have so many bullets in the chamber we can squat with a bar, right? So front squat or back squat, kind of recharging the system, clearing some asymmetries, developing some unilateral strength again, which we did a couple blocks ago. Nice little break of the monotony, just getting some things back dialed in, and kind of acknowledging the fact that when you bilaterally load a lot, you typically start developing a lot of asymmetries, and when you get back to doing a unilateral exercise, it's really transparent. But until you do that, you don't really notice it. You're just kind of banging front squats and going through it, and you're like, all right, this is hard, I'm getting stronger, and then all of a sudden, some sort of mild injury, or you start plateauing, and it could be from some sort of deficit from right to left, or some sort of asymmetry that's causing pain or dysfunction.
Low incline bench is a series of practice 2. Is this fat grip, and if not, why not?
It is a regular grip, and fat grip's one of our tools we use a ton here. One, to get greater activation through that whole shoulder girdle, but the other big part of it is it potentially might limit the bar weight, right? Where it's kind of a restrictor plate, where it's going to cap you at a certain point to not surpass potentially the structural unit in your shoulder. And breaking from that and getting a really good block of developing just good volume. Again, our goal is to get as much weight in the bar as possible with great technique to maximize the effectiveness of it. It's nice to break away from the fat grip and to utilize just a traditional barbell.
Moving on into the B series, I see a handful of these, maybe I've forgotten a little bit, but that I don't know that I've seen on the program before. Looking at a couple, like the band Good Morning, maybe we've done that before, the plate full front raise. Is that a first? Is that making its first appearance here in our block? Can you talk a little bit about the B series and kind of the science and organization and the purpose behind those?
So the periodization is going back to that functional hypertrophy versus hypertrophy. If we're looking for a time under tension guideline, it's anywhere from 45 seconds to about a minute and 15 to really work hypertrophy in a traditional sense. Really glycolytic, that means it's probably more of a lactic energy system. Goal is to burn through as much glycogen as possible. And the more glycogen we burn through, theoretically, the more mTOR pathways are stimulated, or protein synthesis pathways. We want that. We want that during this block. So one, the B series has to be consistent with the block's theme of accumulation, which is this goal is going to be hypertrophy. And then two, picking exercises biomechanically that can sustain that much time under tension, right? Like it'd be really, really hard to do a barbell overhead split squat for 8 each leg with a 4-0 exo tempo. Technique would break down quickly. Extreme example, but what we want to utilize is movements that really facilitate, hey, I can load this for a big bit or good a time without structurally breaking down. And the other aspect from a program design aspect is balance is always going to be a big part of what we're doing structurally, right? So we tell everybody we want to be able to push as much as we pull in every direction. And if we're doing a push in the A series, we're going to complement that with a pull in the A series, and then same thing on the B series going down. So whatever we didn't do in the A series, we're going to focus on that in the B series. So we have a foundational movement or a correlate movement going on in our A series. We're going to utilize some sort of accessory work in the B series that's the antagonist to that A series.
Now, looking at the bookends of each session, we've got a warm-up and we've got, in this case, a KPI with the assault bike. Are there any, can you talk a bit about the theory and the organization and the reasoning behind the warm-up as it pertains specifically to this block?
Yeah. The accumulation warm-up, one is we know the show. It's going to be that 45 minutes we're in the weight room and getting after it. So we don't want to have this super high threshold strategy where we're kind of getting people dialed up to train. It's got to be a part of the session. We really feel strongly that we can improve motor patterns through a good quality warm-up of guided flexibility, mobility, and just straight up movement training. And we also feel that it should complement what we're doing in the training session, right? So our movements should mirror or mimic some of the things that we're trying to do in the weight room. So it's not foreign or completely juxtaposed to what we've been doing outside. It should complement each other nicely. And from the other lens is, do we have a better shot of improving movement unloaded outside, where it's a little less threatening and people just move freely and we can see people as they are. We like to tell our coaches, always use your movement prep period as a means to look at how your members or athletes are doing and create a great diagnostic for what your session is going to be like. If you feel like it's low energy, you got to meet them when they come in the weight room and try to break that before it even becomes a problem. If you see people really restricted and stiff, it's a great opportunity to go up to them like, hey, is everything all right? Do you have something going on? And creating your inventory of maybe modifications you might do in the weight room. And then in terms of KPIs are what we call key performance indicators. And two parts to that. One, we want to assess your structurally balanced, right? So looking at your push versus your pull. Going back to what we talked about in our A's and B's series is, if you push it, you better be able to pull it. So we utilize a upper body assessment, which is for everybody kind of like a pretty simple way to assess where we're at in terms of our balance of pushing and pulls. And we do a bodyweight bench assessment versus a NutriGrip pull-up assessment. And the goal is to have equal amount of reps between the two. Is it 100% across the board the case? No, but it gives us something to strive towards. And if we can pull as much as we're pushing, we should have a pretty solid structure going on in our shoulder girdle. And it means we're doing our job of balancing out as well as encouraging putting some weight on your pull-ups and your rows to really make sure that you're complementing all the weight that you're pushing pressing-wise. And the other KPI assessment is an assault bike. Again, simple, low barrier of entry, everyone can do it. Not easy by any stretch of imagination, but we can get a really good snapshot of just what your energy systems are doing, right? So most of the stuff we do in the weight room is pretty glycolytic or lactic, right? We're gonna burn through a ton of glycogen and it's gonna accumulate a lot of acidity. So we should theoretically be really, really developed in that energy system. What's our other energy systems look like our alactic? Do we have power? Can we generate a lot of force, just one all-out effort? So we use a 0.2 mile sprint in the assault bike to see that. And a really good time for that is 21 to 20 seconds. We've actually had a member hit 19 seconds, which is generating a ton of force and power. One all-out effort, you can see some things. Another way to look at potentially vertical jump or some other things like a broad jump or a med ball throw. Space, time, equipment, kind of hard teaching. We just don't have the setup right now to do that. So assault bike facilitates that big time. The next level would be a half mile, which is looking more of that lactic and glycolytic system. We should be really good there. This is kind of our bread and butter. We know that this helps a lot with body composition and building muscle. It's that most visceral of the energy systems, the one people can walk away from and say, okay, that was a really hard training session, but it's good to see where we're at. And then the final one would be a 1 mile. All out effort, see what you got for 1 mile, and kind of gauge what our energy systems are telling us, right? We should be really developed in all areas. And if we have a limiting factor, right, if I don't have a really good 0.2 mile percentile the rest of the gym, I can develop strength and power. If I have a poor 1 mile, probably have poor aerobic fitness, and that's going to limit my recoverability from these workouts. And from a health perspective, we're only as good as our mitochondria dictates us to be, and the more aerobic pathways we have, our mitochondria is a little bit more dialed in. And from a recommendation, all out of all of this is, hey, I can definitively tell someone, hey, you need to improve your pull strength. You need to improve your alactic ability, or your aerobic ability. Because the whole goal of this is just strengthen weaknesses and just see where we're at and see if the program's actually adhering to helping people and making people better for the long haul. And we need feedback from time to time to see how that goes.
Cool. Is there any other touch points that you'd like to mention?
The other part, in terms of just kind of staying with the last topic, is we do utilize a cool down period at the end. And from there, we rotate between a couple different modalities, LDOA being one, which is we're using this block. And LDOA is essentially utilizing fascial slings to create distraction at certain points of the spine. And we see a lot of compressive loads going on in our weight room. And we like to use something like LDOA at the end to help, one, decompress, but two, always come back to, let's make sure that we're including some sort of recovery at the end of training sessions. If they don't get enough of it from us, they can kind of adhere to it on their own, a little bit of homework, but let's expose them to as much modalities of recovery. And the other one we're using this block is a yoga circuit, just a simple 7 exercise circuit, flow through each one of them, see if you have any nicks and dings, things that you're walking away with, and just trying to curate that holistic approach of let's develop really good strength, hypertrophy, power. Let's develop really good movement, and let's give some really good means to recover from these challenging workouts.